Creek Studios.
There are certain things you just don't do in these mountains. I don't know that anybody ever really explained why. It's just what you were told growing up. And after a while, you stop asking questions about it. Maybe it's because you don't want to stir something up that's been better left alone. Or maybe it's because these stories have been told for so long that they start to feel like the truth, whether you believe them or not. Either way, there are things you don't do in these mountains, like telling the wind to come in when it blows your door open, or yelling out your own name in the woods at night. Just little things like that. And if you're from around here, you know exactly what I mean. Because Appalachia, at least in the stories, has always been a place that holds on to things. The roots run deep here, in the land, in the families, in the history that's been passed down from one generation to the next. But right alongside those roots, there have always been shadows, stories that linger, things people remember but don't always want to explain. And most of the time, when you start digging into something like that, even the ones that sound like folklore, you can usually trace it back to something at its core, something at the center of it, something that started it all, or something that stayed. And this week, we're going to a place where people have been trying to do that for a very long time. Not a house, not a building, but a holler. Out in Rich Valley, Virginia, in the southwestern part of the state, where the land opens up into farmland and then tightens back in between the ridges, there's a place like that, and people don't say much about it unless you ask. And even then, you might not get much more than a short answer, and a look that tells you not to press it any further. Because whatever's tied to that holler, it's been there a long time, and over the years, the people who've lived there and the ones who spent time there have had stories. More than a few. If you're drawn to true stories from Appalachia, the kind rooted in history, folklore, crime, and things that people don't always say out loud, then you're in the right place. This is Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia Podcast. We release new episodes every Saturday, and if you decide to stay, go ahead and press that follow button. That way these stories don't have to come looking for you. Follow along with this podcast. You know, I just don't like to repeat a story I've been told and leave it at that. I try to go see places for myself, try to understand them a little better, try to get a feel what it's really like there. So, per usual, I got in the car and I drove to Rich Valley. It was one of those clear mountain evenings where the wind was gently rustling the landscape with the sun starting to lower over the ridges. And as you drive through there, you start to understand just how peaceful a place this really is. It's beautiful country, wide pasture lands, farms spread out across the valley, and mountains rising up on both sides. As I continued on my drive, turning off the main road and back deeper into the mountains, I eventually turned up the holler, and I made my way to the top of it. It's steeper than you might expect, a long gravel road just wide enough for one vehicle. And as you go up, it starts to close in on you a little. The ridges come in tighter. It gets darker, even during the daytime, and you can feel it getting quieter the farther you go. And then there's the place where the house used to sit, long been torn down and turned into pasture land. From what I was told, the house that used to sit there was probably built somewhere around the early 1900s, and that's the house people talk about in this story. I walked around the spot to where the house used to sit, took my time, tried to take it in, and envisioned what it must have looked like back then. It's easy to imagine how a story like this could have taken hold, because it still feels the same, like you've stepped back in time, because one of the earliest accounts tied to this place goes back to around 1975. And it starts the way a lot of stories do around here, with nothing out of the ordinary. Just two men, John and George, standing at the top of the holler, just having a conversation after a hard day's work, like they had done 100 times before. And while they were standing there, talking, looking around, something caught their attention. Now, neither one of them wanted to be the first one to say anything, because, well, it would have sounded crazy. So they just stood there and stared up the road, and after a moment, John finally said, "Did you see something?" And George, relieved, said that he did. Neither one, not wanting the other to think that they had lost their mind, said, "Let's both say at the same time what we saw." And they did, and they both said they saw a white object, something solid enough to notice, but strange enough that it didn't make any sense to them. It moved across the road, went across the creek, and then went up the bank, and then it disappeared straight into the house. And the time of day is what made this story different, because this wasn't something that they seen at night, or in the dark, or under conditions where you could second guess it later. This was broad daylight, clear enough that they both saw it, and clear enough that neither one of them changed their story. And then John got a phone call. It was a call from the hospital to tell him that his pregnant wife had been taken to the hospital while he was at work that day, and she had just given birth to his son. And through some digging, I was able to track down one of the men from that story, one of the two who were standing in that holler and saw that object that day. And he told me the story almost exactly the way it had been told to me before. No change in it, no added detail, just the same account. He said what they saw was a white ball. He said it was about the size of a basketball, rolling on its own and disappearing into that house. And he told me that after that day, he never saw it again. Not once. It was a one-time thing for him, and whatever it was, it never showed itself to him again. But he told me something else that was interesting, that his wife was one of a group of sisters who over the years had their own experiences in that holler, something that I'll get to more here in just a minute. And when I asked him if anything else had ever happened to him over the years, he thought about it for a minute, like he was going back through it all in his head. And then he told me about one other time. He said he was inside the house, and out of nowhere, something struck the back of it, hard enough that it got their attention right away. He said it sounded like a large rock or something heavy hitting the side of the house, so they went outside to look and investigate to see what it was. They walked around, checked where it sounded like it came from, looked for anything that could explain it, but there was nothing there. No rock, no damage, nothing out of place, nothing to explain what they had just heard. And then, he said, about 15 minutes later, the phone rang, and when he answered it, he was told that a loved one had just passed away. And when he told me that part, he added something I hadn't heard before, not in any of the stories, not in anything tied to any old Appalachian wives' tales that I'd ever heard. He said around here, there's a belief that if you hear something fall, whether in your house or outside, you need to go find out what it was. You need to identify it, because if you don't, it brings bad luck to you or your family. The next account takes us into the 1980s and early 90s, and this one comes from a group of sisters who grew up going in and out of that holler. And according to them, this wasn't something they had just heard about over the years. It was something they had actually experienced for themselves. They said it just appeared one day. The first sister to see it, Fran, said she was going up that holler one night and caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of her eye. At first, she thought it was just a reflection. She looked, and the closer she got, it started to begin looking like a man. Tall, slender, but all white, with no outline of a face. And as she drove past, she said the hair stood up on the back of her neck, and the temperature in the car got noticeably colder. And then a moment later, the feeling went away, just as quick as it had come on. At first, she didn't know what to make of it. She had never really seen anything quite like that in her life, so she just kept it to herself. Then another time, Fran, Becky, and Linda, the three sisters, had gotten together, and one of them brought up seeing something in the holler, and that's when they realized they had all been seeing it this whole time. They said it wasn't something they saw every time they went in and out of the holler, but they saw it often enough that it started to feel consistent. They saw it the same way, a tall white figure, something shaped like a person, but not quite right, like it had the outline of a body, but no real detail to it, no face, nothing you could focus on, just there, not like a ghost, but like a thing. And they always referred to it as the white thing. And the feeling they described before they saw it was interesting. They each described it in the same way. Hair standing up on the back of their necks, the sudden drop in temperature. There was nothing about it that felt welcoming, they said. Nothing about it that felt friendly. And nothing about it that felt like something you'd want to get close to. It had a sense of something evil. And when that feeling came over them, they knew to be prepared for what they were about to encounter. And then they would see it, standing off to the side of the road or farther up ahead, not moving, not doing anything obvious, just standing there, waiting, like it was watching for what they didn't know. And what I found interesting was something else they mentioned. They said the more of them they were together, the more likely it was they would see it. If one of them was alone, maybe nothing would happen. But if all three sisters were together, it was almost a guarantee that it would show itself. And over time, they just kind of got used to seeing it, they said. Not that they weren't afraid of it. They just weren't as startled by it. And when you start hearing the same kind of story from different people, told in different ways, but with the same details, you start to wonder if it's more than just something that's been passed around over time. By the time the 90s came, word about that holler had started to get around a little more, not just locally, but outside of the area too. And at some point, during that time, it was told that a woman came in from out of state. Now, depending on who you ask, people describe her a little differently. Some said she was sensitive to things, maybe what you'd call a medium or psychic, while others weren't sure exactly what to make of her at all. But one thing people seemed to agree on was that when she came into that holler, she said something felt off, that there was something there, something she believed had been there for a long time. And according to the way it was told, she didn't think it was just passing through. She believed it was tied to the land itself. At some point, something terrible had happened on that land, hundreds of years ago, she said, and whatever was the result of that tragedy had stayed behind. So, it was said she decided she was going to try and do something about it, some kind of cleansing, something meant to clear the land, remove whatever it was from that holler. Now, exactly what she did depends on who's telling the story. Some people say it was something like an exorcism. Others say she just came in and did what she believed needed to be done. But either way, she went through with it. And for a while after that, people wondered if anything had changed, if whatever was there had finally been dealt with, or if it had made any difference at all. But when I asked what became of her, they said that after it was all over, she wasn't the same. They said she left and was never heard from again. And there were other stories coming from that same holler. This one involving two women, Judy and Becky. And Becky was one of the three sisters who had a history of seeing that white thing. They were leaving the holler late one night after visiting and heading back home to a nearby town. Just the two of them in the car, Becky in the passenger seat. It was late, around 10 p.m., and dark. The kind of dark you only get in rural Appalachia, where there aren't any streetlights, and the houses are sparsely dotted along the road. It's pretty much just you with an occasional passing car. The only lights are coming from your headlights as they shine on the road ahead. And as they were making their way out of the holler, Judy said she glanced up in the rearview mirror, just like you do without thinking, and that's when she saw it. Someone was sitting there in the back seat. For a moment, she froze, looked away, looked back into the mirror again, hoping it was just a shadow or reflection. But it was still there. And instead of turning around or slamming on the brakes, she just kept driving. After a moment, she spoke real calm, like she didn't want the situation to be any worse than it already was. And she said to Becky, "Don't turn around, but there's somebody in the back seat." And Becky's response was, "I know." She hadn't turned around, not even once, but she could feel it. That same feeling she had experienced many times before, the hair standing up on the back of her neck. And for a while, neither one of them said much of anything. They just kept driving. Judy would glance up into the mirror, hoping whoever or whatever was there would be gone. But she would still see it sitting there, and then she would look back to the road, not wanting to stare any longer than she had to. Becky just sit there with her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead, not turning around, not speaking, just feeling it, knowing something was there with them. And then, after a stretch of road that probably felt longer than it really was, Judy looked up again, and this time, it was gone. No movement, no sound, no sign that anything had ever been there at all, just an empty back seat. And Becky said she knew it too, before anything was even said out loud, because the feeling that something had been present with them was now gone. Just as suddenly as it had come on, it left. And the way it was told to me, it was almost like it had just come along for the ride, like something had followed them out of that holler, stayed with them for a little while, and then, when it was done, it left. I also spoke with an old man who had lived in that holler all of his life, one of the last remaining residents there. This wasn't someone just passing through or hearing things secondhand. This was somebody who knew the place, knew the old gravel road, knew the houses, knew the people. And he was just as familiar with the stories as anybody. He'd heard them growing up, stories passed down through his family, from his mother, his aunts, his cousins, people he trusted, people who, according to him, had seen things. So, it wasn't something he dismissed or brushed off. He knew what had been said, and more importantly, he knew where it had came from. But when I asked him about his own experiences, his answer was different. He told me that in all the years he had lived there, coming and going at all hours of the day and night, early mornings, late nights, times when most people wouldn't even be out, he had never once seen anything he couldn't explain. Nothing unusual, nothing that made him stop and question what he was looking at, and nothing that even came close to what the other people had described. No white figure, no feeling, nothing. And the way he said it, it wasn't dismissive, and it wasn't like he was trying to disprove anything. It was just matter of fact, like he was simply telling his own experience and leaving it at that. That, in all his time here, whatever other people said they'd experienced, he hadn't. And in a story like this, that matters, because not every place that has stories shows them to everyone, and sometimes the people who know a place the best are the ones who've never seen anything at all. And there's one more story, and this one is more recent, not something from the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, but from 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. And this one involves a young girl named Ava, about 14 years old at the time, and I actually had the chance to speak with her and hear her experience in her own words. Because after hearing everything else, after going out there myself and talking to the people who lived in that holler for years, I wanted to know if those stories had carried over into the present day. Ava said she had grown up hearing those same stories passed down through her family about something in that holler, but they never told her exactly what it was, just a white thing, she said. They told her she was too young and it would just scare her. And she said she did what a lot of people do at that age, especially around Halloween. She went looking for it. Ava said it was just something fun to do, something to get into the spirit of it all. So she went. They drove into the holler, not even sure they were at the right place, looked around, waited for a while. Nothing happened. No sighting, no feeling, nothing out of the ordinary. And after a while, they left, turned out of the holler, and after many twists and turns, they wound back up onto the main road, driving away like it had just been another night. But she told me they hadn't gone too far, not even a half a mile, when something changed. All at once, the hair stood up on the back of her neck. That same feeling you've heard come up more than once. And she said it wasn't just a feeling. It was like something telling her she needed to turn around. So she did. She turned around and looked through the rear window, and that's when she saw it. She described it as tall and thin, almost like a man, but not exactly. She said it looked like it was wearing a top hat, and everything about it was white, not solid, not fully there, but clear enough that she knew exactly what she was looking at. And she said it didn't walk, it ran, fast enough that it crossed the road in an instant. And in that moment, she panicked, started screaming, telling them to go, to drive faster, not even sure if what she was saying was making any sense. She was just trying to get away from it. And she told me that to this day, that's the only time she's ever seen anything like that. And for a while after that, she questioned it. She thought maybe it was just the moment, the timing, the fact that it was Halloween, that maybe she had just worked it up in her own mind. That was until years later, when she talked to other members of her family at a gathering, people she had never met before, and who didn't even live around here. She found out during conversation that they knew about it too, and when she started describing what she saw, they stopped her mid-story. She said you could see the shock on their faces, because what she described was exactly what they had been told as well, down to the very last detail. And that kind of bothered Ava, because it meant that whatever she saw that night wasn't just something in her head or a figment of her imagination. And when I asked her what she thought it was, she didn't hesitate. She told me she doesn't believe in ghosts or apparitions or things like that, but she does believe in something else. And in her words, what she saw that night wasn't a ghost. She believes it was something much darker, something demonic. And there was one thing she said that intrigued me. When we were talking about all of this, about how she had only been in that holler a handful of times, and yet she saw it. While there are people who have lived there for decades and never have, I told her that it almost seemed like it might be tied to the women in that family, because the ones who had seen it, other than John and George, had all been women. And she just kind of paused for a second and said, "Well, I guess that tells you something then." And she left it at that. But what Ava didn't disclose in that interview was that she was actually the granddaughter of one of the three sisters. Now, as far as why this thing seems to be tied to the women of that family, no one I spoke with could really give me a clear answer. The people I'd asked had their own thoughts, their own ideas about what it might be. But at the end of the day, that's all it was, speculation. There wasn't anything concrete, nothing you could point to and say, that's why. But there's one thing they all agreed on. Whatever it is, it's not something that feels hospitable. It's not something that gives off any kind of friendly presence. Not something that feels like it belongs there in any good way. Every person who's experienced it describes it the same way, the same feeling, that sense that something just isn't right about it. And whether it's something real, something tied to that land, or something we don't fully understand, or whether it's the minds of several different women across 3 generations, all experiencing something they can't quite explain, that's something we may never truly know. And after hearing all these different experiences, after going there myself, standing in that holler, and talking to the people who live there, and the ones who've seen something they can't explain, you start to realize something. Not every story is meant to be figured out. Because in a place like that, you've got 2 things that have always existed side by side. And that's really what this comes down to, the roots and the shadows. The roots are easy enough to understand. They're in the land, in the farms, in the families that have been there for generations, and in the stories that get passed down from one person to the next. That part makes sense. That's the part you can see and trace and hold on to. But right alongside those roots, there have always been shadows. Things people remember, things people feel, things people see while others never do. And maybe that's what makes a place like that what it is. Not just what's there, but what people carry with it. Because in that same holler, you've got people who've seen something they'll never forget, and others who've lived there their whole lives and never saw anything at all. And somehow, both of those things can be true at the same time. And I'll be honest with you, there's one other thing I didn't mention earlier. When I went out there to visit, I didn't just go during the day. I went back after dark, just to get a feel for it. And as I was driving up that holler, something white ran out in front of me, straight across the road. It happened so fast that I couldn't tell you exactly what it was. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Or maybe I saw the same thing others have been seeing all these years. And if that idea about being tied to the women in that family has any truth to it at all, and you're wondering how I could have seen anything, well, I wasn't alone. I had one of those women tied to that family in the car with me. And I don't know what that means, but it's something I haven't been able to shake. Because in a place like that, you don't always get answers. Sometimes all you get are moments, things you can't fully explain, but also can't completely ignore. And around here, that's just part of it. The roots run deep, and sometimes the shadows don't ever really leave. This has been Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia Podcast, where every root tells a story and every shadow hides one. As a reminder, these stories are drawn from public records, historical reporting, and conversations passed down through families, neighbors, and memories. Some names have been changed, and where the written record goes quiet, details have been carefully dramatized for storytelling.